good to go? Yes, I am. That's good. And the clicker is here. Good. Thank you very much for inviting me, Steve. First and foremost, it's a pleasure to come back. I was here 2 years ago. Stacey is too small. And quite a lot has happened, so it's a bit like reality TV where I get to come back and give you an update of what's happening, and then 2 years from now I'll come back and give you another update on what's happening, and hopefully it'll be positive as well. But one of the reasons that I like coming here, and I actually don't like to speak very often at conferences now because I'm quite busy and I'm in Africa most of the time. Sorry? Is that, first of all, it's the agricultural heartland of America, and I operate from the agricultural heartland of Africa because I really like and admire entrepreneurs. I am one, and frankly I would say probably 90% of this room is full of entrepreneurs. And it takes guts and backbone to be an entrepreneur. And also because I think if we don't continue to think globally, and if you all don't continue or kickstart yourselves into thinking globally, you will face serious problems ahead. And in fact, that's been very clear today in hearing what Jim has said. Just generally, I think that we have to have a much more global perspective than many of us have currently. So, my case is for African agriculture, and I'm not the novelty act today, actually, surprisingly enough. I think many of you probably think that Africa is so unusual and so far out there that you wouldn't consider investing in Africa. And you couldn't be farther from the truth. Africa has so much opportunity that if you were to visit, and I think many of you should, you would have trouble not investing there. It would be the opposite of what you think. When I take people down to Africa, they are constantly astonished at how good where we are, the infrastructure is, the water is, legal rights, land title. It's much better in many places than you think it's going to be. And the point is it is a diversified continent, 54 countries, 1,000 languages. You can't speak generally really about Africa, except to say that in some areas, like SSA, Sub-Saharan Africa, English-speaking in the Southern Cone, there are so many opportunities that I've got to bring myself back to reality and focus ourselves as a company. Just a bit of background about me before I launch into some of these slides. And in fact, a lot of my presentation is pictorial because I think what I say is not going to have nearly as great an impact as what I show. My interest in agriculture, I think, is almost in my DNA. I am not a born farmer, but I worked on my grandmother's farm in Vancouver, just outside of Vancouver, Canada. She was a serious businesswoman. She had a very large farm, and I spent all of my summers working on this farm. And so I did the, cattle ranching and feeding calves and driving tractors and all the things that Jim thinks are very important. I did all those things growing up. And then when I was 12, I came back to Canada regularly, but my family moved to Rome because my father worked for the United Nations. He worked for the FAO. And then he took me, as Jim is describing, taking his daughters around the world with him to look at all the sites where he was working. And I regularly would go places with him and see what he was doing. And so emerging markets were also embedded in what I did. And I've spent my entire life, actually, as a female in business, being told what I shouldn't be doing. And one of the things I was told I shouldn't be doing is I shouldn't go into emerging markets in 1987. You shouldn't do that, Susan. You shouldn't do that, whatever happens, because they're going to amount to nothing. And that's one of the things that I'm telling you now. Africa will be so massive in the same way as I thought that emerging markets, and in fact it was so categorically obvious that emerging markets were going to grow and expand from 1988 onwards. This is Africa's decade. It is not a lost continent. It is a continent that has a wealth of untapped resources, a demographic which is the most compelling globally, a workforce which will be the largest in the world by 2040, and masses of agricultural opportunity. So in running our business, and as I said, I was here 2 years ago. I was talking then about what our business was doing. I actually own an operations business called Invest Agricultural Corporation, and I started it in 2008. In about 18 months ago, I bought out my co-founder, and now I own the company in full. And when I did that, I spent the last year after that, or the first year after that, taking stock and actually putting my stamp on the business. And this was important for me because I think anyone that runs a business would say the same thing. I wanted to make sure that we were running this the way that I thought we should be. And so I spent quite a lot of time, hold on, sorry about that, I'm missing something. I think, sorry, I was just missing a slide. I spent quite a lot of time looking at what we should do in terms of assessing the business and how it should be run. So what we have now is we have an agricultural conglomerate in the making. It's small. We've got about 25,000 acres. We've got two processing plants. We've got a food distribution business. We're diversified, but we cover turf to table. We're diversified as a country. We operate in South Africa, Swaziland, Mozambique, and Zambia. We, in fact, I sold the operation in Zimbabwe last April for a number of reasons, not because I don't think Zimbabwe has upside eventually, but I don't know when that eventually is going to be. And I don't want to hang waiting for 10 years for that opportunity to show itself. Increasing food production is obvious. The whole reason that I'm in this business is actually to increase food production. I'm a big believer in food security and the fact that food security is going to be a problem in the future. In fact, it's a problem now, and we should be very aware of it. And so that's why I started this business originally. And also, it is the highest impact investment you can make. It could be that many of you aren't particularly sensitive to high impact investments. It may be that you don't really care if there's community upliftment, or you don't really care if you can help to educate people that have literally very little hope in Africa. But this is the one way that you can actually cover everything with one investment, because agriculture actually hires, employs, and does such high impact work across these communities that our private pools of capital are what make a lot of these communities worthwhile and actually gives them a chance to feed themselves. Okay, so I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to avoid goat paths. I think in business growth, we spend time on top of mountains we shouldn't be on. If we were lateral thinkers, then we would go around the hills. We wouldn't go on top of the hills and over the hills, and we would avoid those goat paths, and we would be smart, and we would actually build businesses properly and avoid all the ugliness that can happen if a business is experiencing difficulties. And so the year that I spent after I bought the company was to make sure that we could avoid goat paths. And we were being as efficient as we possibly could be. It was the post-2008 era where, frankly, it was time to cut all fat from the business. So I spent a lot of time focusing on cutting the burn rate. I cut that in half on a monthly basis. I cut all of our expenses by 75%. I am very draconian when it comes to cost because I don't think our investors should be paying any fees, anything towards anything but agriculture. So we have extremely low running costs compared to what they were. And even what they were actually quite acceptable, but times have changed. So Africa, why now? I mean, essentially, Africa is a continent that has very high growth. The growth rate over the last decade has been 5% on average for the entire continent. But of the 10 highest growing countries over the last decade, or 2000 to 2010, 6 of those were located in Africa. The country that had the highest growth rate in the 2000 decade was Angola at 11.1%. And after that was Nigeria at 9%, Ethiopia at 8.5%, Mozambique at 7.5%, and so on, then Chad and others. But 6 of the top 10 highest growing economies, or strongest growing economies, were located in Africa. China came second to Angola, by the way, at 10.5% growth annualized. It's uncrowded, and actually, let's face it, if you want to invest, don't follow crowds. I never have. And I was told often that I should be, but I don't follow crowds. So if you want to be a crowd follower, don't go to Africa. Wait till it's saturated by Chinese people and by others, Indians and other groups, and then come up and pick up the scraps. But if you don't want to be in that position, then start thinking about Africa now. The demographics are compelling. Africa is, just to give you an idea of the size and of the scope, Africa has the same population size as India, but is 10 times the size in terms of land mass. Its population is largely, in fact, half of the population of Africa is under 18 years old. Half the population of Latin America is under 25 years old. China, under 35 years old. England, 50. So you've got quite an ageist population in Europe and a very expansive, dynamic population in Africa. And as I said, a very large workforce that is currently untapped. I'm sure you've heard this before. Africa has a very large mass of uncultivated arable land. And so I am regularly asked why there's the rush, because there's so much land. If you just wait 10 years, go when everyone's built the infrastructure and just take advantage of it then. And that's fine. It'll just cost 5 times more, because land values in Mozambique, for example, in Maputo are going up astronomically on an annualized basis. In fact, in Zambia, the land values, again, are also going up very strongly every year. On average, it's about 20% per year, but in fact, it's far more strongly in some of these city centers. And that is actually now encroaching on the agricultural land. The land size of Africa is 3 times China, 10 times India. You could put all of US, China, India, Western Europe, and Argentina, and you'd still have land left over. So it gives you some idea of the size of the continent. On the demographic scale, in 2030, Africa will surpass China in terms of population and is expected to reach 2 billion at about by 2050. So the growth is actually exponential. Of that population, currently 1 billion, 400 million have mobile phones. Only 15% have internet access. Okay, so the markets are massive. As these people become more wealthy, and they are, slowly, they start to spend more money, and they start to eat differently. And they eat differently in a way that we are now addressing because we grow a lot of vegetables, for example. Africa has a lot of fresh water. It's not all about the Sahara Desert. We operate south of the desert, and in that area, there are many major rivers. In fact, Ethiopia has 9 major rivers, and it's the source of the Nile. There are 9 river basins in Ethiopia. We have farms on the Zambezi, for example, massive. Victoria Falls, enormous. So there is a lot of water in certain parts of Africa. Now this is quite interesting. This examination of land values I find quite interesting. It will be difficult to find a continent that has land values that are as inexpensive as Africa. I know you think in acres, I think in hectares, and you know that there are 2.4 acres to a hectare. But to give you some idea, Zambia is somewhere around $1,000 or $2,000 a hectare. If we break this down into acres, we're talking $500 to $2,000 an acre for land in Africa. Some of it irrigated, actually. If you go up the expansion here, Argentina is, by comparison, $11,000 an acre, or a hectare, excuse me. The US, well, I think it's going up quite dramatically, actually. It's far more. England is $22,000 a hectare, and Germany is $25,000 a hectare. So I think the US is actually now more expensive than many of those, as a matter of fact. Here, the land values have gone up that much in agri. So in investing, this is what we did. Because I thought, I came from an investment banking background, and I started a hedge fund in 1997. I had a mentality where at that time I thought, we should start a fund. We'll start a private equity fund. And in fact, that's what we have, a private equity fund. But I think it is not optimal. The optimal way to do this, and we're going to change this now, is to roll assets into a corporate vehicle so that investors can directly own the assets on the ground. We now have a fund, and the fund, we chose Africa for these reasons. I mean, it's the last frontier, and I truly believe that it's the final frontier that's not being basically developed. Agriculture for obvious reasons, social responsibility because that's becoming much more serious and actually with very good reason, and environmental sustainability. But we also do co-investment. So we have groups that can come in and co-invest in our projects. Some of them are quite inexpensive. I mean, and allocations are sort of 1 to 2 to 3 million. But we will eventually roll into a corporate vehicle. This is our current pipeline. I put this up because I'm sorry for the confusion. I actually am quite fussy about slides. I don't like too much wording on a slide. I'm sorry, but I could change this. We have over 1,000 employees. When I bought the company out fully, we had about 3, so it shows you how much I've cut. But it gives you an idea of where South Africa is the powder blue country in the south. And the little gray dot is Swaziland, just on the right-hand side of it. The yellow country along the right is Mozambique, so we're located there. Then the country that looks like a sleeping baby, the purple one, is Zambia, and we're there. And the green circle in the middle between, just above the blue South Africa, is Zimbabwe, and that is what we have we've just sold out from. But you can see that we own land sort of down the east coast. There are very good microclimates, and the weather is also very, very favorable. I wanted to give you an example of some of the things that we're doing on our sites. We have 10 sites. We had 12 sites when I bought the company out, and I sold 2 of them to rationalize the business and get our focus down to our knitting, which is grains, vegetables, nuts. Okay?
There's a clicker with a pointer, I think.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Wait a second.
Okay, that's fine. That doesn't matter, don't worry.
Here you go.
Oh, good, thanks. Thank you. The bottom. Okay, thank you. That's great. Thanks, Ken. We do grains, vegetables, nuts, and livestock. If you sort of let me loose, we would do fish and timber and more. We're cutting our biofuels down, but you can get a little too excited and just go nuts. You really have to focus and really focus hard, because then you start looking at carbon trading and you start looking at all the other spin-offs and your own retail stores, which is what we've started. It gets a little bit crazy because the opportunities are just vast. But we're just focusing for now and optimizing these assets right now. EI Ranch is a farm we have in Swaziland. Swaziland is this landlocked country in South Africa. It's very hilly, it's beautiful. It's like the little Switzerland of Africa, South Africa. We grow about 21 different types of vegetables there. We export some of them to France and to Switzerland and to Germany. 93% of what we grow stays local, and 7% comes to America, Canada, and Europe. EI also grows cane. Sugar cane is a good crop for, and it's also a cattle farm. But we are very active growers of vegetables. We supply a lot of vegetables to the main retail stores. I don't know what the names of the retail stores here actually are. I don't know whether it's Safeway or whatever they're called here. But in South Africa and Africa, they're called ShopRite, Pick and Pay, Spar, and we supply all of these stores with our produce. Barvale is another farm that we have in South Africa. It's about 2.5 hours from Johannesburg. We have vegetables and cattle. We are about to start doing macadamia nuts there. I'm going to get onto nuts in a minute because we're big nut growers and we're nut processors actually, but we are big supporters of nuts. Very profitable business. It grows 27 types of vegetables. We're actually fine-tuning that and getting down to fewer vegetables now. EEV is started off as a biofuels farm in Mozambique. We've now diversified. The biofuels aspect is not quite so interesting to me, but we grow lettuce, we grow onions, we grow mushrooms, melons, beetroot, what we call sort of the high-end vegetables, sort of a higher-end vegetable than the macro vegetables. Atuba, Mozambique is one of our greenfields projects. This project I'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute, but beautiful site, very popular. I get bid on the site regularly. We grow rice and tomatoes and potatoes and beans and maize. And we've just done a deal with a sugarcane company that came into the region to secure 29,000 hectares. They started a refinery outside our front door, essentially literally 2 kilometers from our front door, or 5 kilometers from our front door, I think. And we are growing cane for this refinery as well. We're starting a banana plantation here in about a month. The funding for that required is something like $1.5 million. The payback on that money is in 13 months. The returns are about 40% per annum, or thereabouts. Bananas are a very profitable business. Kalong in Zambia is our site beside Victoria Falls. It's a spectacular farm. I hope to buy this farm soon myself because it's absolutely phenomenal. It's the largest banana plantation in Zambia. We also grow soya, sorghum. We grow groundnuts for USAID. I think we grow for various names actually in America that are testing, that are wanting to distribute corn and foodstuffs to less developed or less fortunate groups in Zambia. In Eastern Cape, which is South Africa on the east side, we operate farms. This is the one place where we don't own the farms ourselves. We operate the farms, and we operate the farms as part of the South African Black Empowerment Program. That program basically is about returning certain farmlands to Black Africans so that they can actually start to farm those lands themselves. We work with the government so that we can train the Black Africans to work the farms, and we have 10-year contracts to retrain these individuals. So they, this has been a bit of a stumbling project. It was supposed to be closed and on its way by 2014. In fact, there is an open Hades that's going to happen. They've only done about 6 or 7% of what they expected to. But they've got, for example, 288 farms in this area, and they want us to operate them. Just gives you some idea of the scope of the business. It's monumental. We grow pepper dews, we grow maize, we grow wheat. But on the vegetables, peppers, and on the crops that we grow, our gross margins are around 70%. Just to give you some idea. I want to have a case study using Zambia as a case study. And I use Zambia as a case study because people have heard about Zambia. It's got a lot going for it, and I think it's probably just worth pointing this out. The government is extremely proactive. Michael Sata was elected about a year ago. Before he was elected, he used to parade as an old man and go into hospitals, and if he wasn't treated right, he'd take off his mask, and he would get very mad at the staff, and he'd take them in and bollock them, basically. And then he became the president. And then he ditched his entourage. Africans love entourages, actually. He ditched the cars, he ditched the entourage. He has a couple of cars that follow around. His vice president, Guy Scott, is a white Zambian. Guy is an former Minister of Agriculture. He's got an open door policy. They come to London, they meet with people like me. They want to see us on the ground. It's a very proactive government. They've got a lot of legal protections in place in Zambia. And I've listed some of the protections that they have begun. But it's a very good place to live and to work. So people are very happy to have to go to Zambia. And in fact, Lusaka has been listed as one of the top 3 places for property investment because land values are going up quite so quickly. Agri in Zambia, this is the current situation. Over 70% of the population works in agriculture. That's about standard for the population in SSA generally. So sub-Saharan Africa, most people work in agriculture. But there are 2 economies. There is quite a substantial commercial farming economy, but there's also a subsistence economy where 75% of Zambians are smallholder farmers. The thing is that this country has strong economic growth, but very little has been put into agriculture. So you're still at the very beginning of the opportunity here. We like Zambia. all the obvious reasons at the top of the page. We know these reasons. We know the reasons of rising population, affluence, etc. But we still have very attractive entry prices. It's a favorable investment climate, and you've got tremendous potential for upside. And that is why we invest there. So what we did is we bought a farm called Kalonga. It's 3,250 hectares, so about 10,000 acres, or 10,000 acres. It's 40 kilometers west of Livingston. We grow bananas and wheat and maize. It's big, as I mentioned. All these photographs are ones that I've taken, so excuse the fact that they're not professional, but it gives you some sense of the reality of the size. This is off one of the planes that I was flying in. We have 8 irrigated pivot circles, 4 dedicated to cereals, 4 dedicated to bananas. This country is proximate to many markets. It's on the border of 5 markets. So to give you a sense of where the farm is, it's 15 minutes from Victoria Falls, one direction, and it's 15 minutes to one of the best game reserves in the world in the other direction on the Botswana border. But that's just, where the farm is. But it literally is surrounded by all of these different countries. We support many agencies near us in terms of food programs, so we use all of the food. All of our second-rate bananas get sent to orphanages, so we're always distributing food. We do not waste food. We apply practices that are the best practices. We have doubled banana yield since we bought the farm on an annual basis, actually. But it started from a low base, so don't get too impressed with that. It's just we started with such a crapped-out farm because it had been left to rot for a year that we then had some very good scope and some very good upside. Matuba is one of our greenfields projects. A very, very good site, a really interesting site, and this is in Mozambique. When I first went there, this is my first shot when I first went there. When I first went to Matuba, I took this photograph. This is the way that the Matuba village lived, where the farm is. In fact, I'll show you, there was no farm. There was an expanse of land with tumbleweed all over it. But that was the village. When I went into the village, Africans spread out. You think they're all going to live close by for safety or for whatever reason. Okay, they're so spread out, there's no transport. So you have to walk all the way to the pump, you've got to walk all the way to your buddy's house. It's like, they spend all their time walking. And this is sort of gives you a sense of how poverty-stricken this place was in 2009. That was the land. I took that picture when we first got there. I was just driving across the land that we had been we'd secured, a couple of thousand hectares. We spent 3 months with 2 caterpillars working 24/7 in driving shifts with chains like this, and cleared all of this out. It took a lot of time and energy, and this was I can honestly say, if we'd known now if we'd known that what we know now, I'm not sure we would have done this, because it was such a massive project. It is greenfields. Actually, agriculture is not for sissies. Greenfields is absolutely not for sissies. We made the bricks to build the buildings. I mean, this whole thing was from scratch. Then we built the buildings. We put the lawns in, we put the plants in. We have to build houses that people want to live in. You can't have managers that have, our managers all have 2 degrees. They're very sophisticated, they're very technical, they're very professional. They don't want to live, some do, but our guys do not want to live 40 kilometers from the hospital in a hut. They want to live on a road that works, near a town, near water, etc. So we built machinery buildings. I mean, I won't bore you with all the different slides, but I just selected a couple of them. We then cropped, and this was some spraying fungicide on one of our potato crops. We put in pump houses. That ditch is like 2.5 times the size of a 6-foot man. We put in pump houses all down this canal system. There's a very, very good, it's right beside the Limpopo River. But to bring the water in from the canal system, you need to get irrigation pumps. We had to bring the irrigation pumps in. Then we get on to MS Evergreen. Evergreen is the largest dehydration plant in Africa. I think there's one that's also large in Egypt, but I've got to check out whether it's the same size. It's 10,000 square meters. It's been running for 50 years, 5 decades. It was a real brand, Evergreen. It was a very, very, very good brand. And then Pioneer Foods bought it and decided that they wanted to sell it after the credit crunch to rationalize their business. It was let to go for about a year as well, so we bought it from them. And it consumes about 120 tons of vegetables a day. It could actually address all of South Africa's needs. It is massive. In fact, this is the interesting part. To replace this plant would cost $17 million, and we bought it at a fraction of that price. So what you've got to do is look at what you're getting and then how much you can spend, how much energy, how much time, how much money you can spend to refurbish it. So we spent a year and a half refurbishing this, and we're now doing, we trialed about 6 different vegetables. We sold the vegetables to our clients, Mars, Unilever, Nestle's, other large clients, Crown, various clients overseas and also locally. And then we decided to do a big onion crop. So now we're just processing this now. This is happening right now, actually, this week. We grew 231 hectares of onions. That's 14,000 tons. You may not know this. Maybe you do know this. Dehydrated onions are the product. You can't, there's such strong demand for dehydrated onions that it was shocking to me. I mean, they're used all over, they're used in so many foods. So we decided to just stick with onions, so we did that. So we grew these onions, and these are just the onion shots, and those are now going into processing now in that plant. If you switch the light on in that plant, then you have to actually start to throw masses of vegetables at it. The plant is fueled with nut shells from our nut processing plant next door. So we've halved our energy costs by fueling it with nut shells. Positive ESG is really important. It is something that is really part of the job. And when you ask any of the general managers on the sites what they could say about social responsibility, they would just say, you know, of course we do this. It's kind of expected, and whatever we do, we build infrastructure and we build housing and water systems. So the first thing that we do is actually look at the employment. We tend to pump quite a lot of cash into any environment that we're in some cases $50,000 a month in salaries, which is really a lot of money for a region. And we put in electricity, we put in all sorts of creches and community centers and things that uplift communities. We have sports teams at all the sites so that the staff can have inter-company leagues, and we actually support those sports leagues. I took this also on the same trip, my first trip to Matuba, because the pump was a shock to me, and I've seen a lot, but I was just surprised that one pump was going to be used for a village of 4,000 people. So that's how they were providing their drinking water to themselves when I first arrived. And so we put in 2 boreholes, one for the cattle and one for the population, and that actually is paramount. We tend to do employment first and then go straight to water. The water issues become vital because we have to make sure that all the community is getting enough water. We put in electricity. That's an orphanage behind the electricity. The orphanage had nothing in it when we got to Matuba, so we provided clothing, and in fact we have trunks in the office. We have a constant flow of any goods at all, bikes and toys and pens. There's a constant flow to all of our sites to distribute these kinds of items. Anyway, we put electricity into the village and into the site and into the orphanage. We build housing like this for our staff. These houses replace what we call settlement housing, and settlement housing can be quite nice, but it's usually grass shacks with no electricity. So you're introducing your senior management to housing that is actually 2 to 3 bedrooms with a television, and they are very, very happy, and frankly, the turnover dissipates in the job role. So there are immense opportunities for adding value in Africa, and you can improve yields in so many ways. I think one of the shocks to me is still, I hear, and I said this yesterday actually, I was at a conference a few months ago, and someone said that Africa had poor technology and that Africa had no local market. And I still, it's almost offensive to me. In many parts of Africa, there's low technology. In many parts of Africa, it's cutting edge technology. And in fact, in South Africa would think that they are actually superior to most people when it comes to technology. So there is not only good technology in the places where we operate, but there are massive, monumental local markets. And that's exactly what farms want, massive local markets. So that's exactly why we're doing what we're doing there. There are many ways from consolidating smaller plots. Obviously, agriculture is about efficiency. It's about scale. It's about making sure that we can expand, and we can expand on all of these sites. And our market access continues to grow because we can export all over Africa, and actually, even though we could export all over Europe, but we can stay in Africa and still not be able to satisfy the demand. Our demand for our mac nuts, we process mac nuts. It's a little cash cow. Our little processing plant for mac nuts is a cash generating machine. And the mac nut demand, just to give you some idea, I get probably every week demand from China for mac nuts. It is that strong. It's constant demand for mac nuts. And we to the point where we are now planting mac nuts all over our different farms. And there's a 3-year waiting list to actually get mac nut trees. So that's how strong the demand is for mac nuts. The IRR in that factory is about 53%. It's a very high annual return. So I hope that you've learned a little bit more about African agriculture. But what I would ask is that you just don't ignore it, because there is so much opportunity there, and the people are so grateful and so supportive when the local people, when you arrive, particularly when you speak English, because the Southern Cone speaks English, obviously, and it's a very, very exciting time to be there. Thank you.